Are you ready for the ultimate apple cider taste test? What's up, hungry people? My name is Felicia, and welcome back to the Starving Chef's Kitchen. Apple picking season is right around the corner, and it can be hard to figure out which apple is best for what you're cooking because there are so many different kinds of apples. Apples are the most valuable fruit grown in America, second only to oranges. Apples as we know them today originated in Asia and are descendants from the Malus sieversii apples that are grown there. The crab apple is the only native apple to America. When settlers came to Jamestown in 1607, they planted the first apple orchards, though most of their apples were still very bitter. In fact, most of the apples grown in America at that time were actually turned into hard cider. Over many generations of grafting apple trees and experimenting with cross-pollination, apples became sweeter and much more desirable. There are over 7,500 different kinds of apples grown all over the world, and 2,500 different varieties grown in the United States alone. But out of those 2,500, only about 100 are commercially available. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the 12 most popular apples that can be found in your local grocery store. Don't forget to stick around until the end of this video, where I'll be turning all of the apples I look at into the ultimate apple cider. First up, let's take a look at ambrosia apples. Ambrosia apples originated in British Columbia in the early 1990s. They're most likely a combination of Golden Delicious and Starking Delicious apples. They're usually a kind of glossy red with yellow splotches, and their flavor is more comparable to that of a pear than other apples. They are slow to brown once they've been cut, which makes them an apple ideal for serving in raw applications. Next we have Jazz apples! The Jazz apple actually originated in New Zealand as a cross between Gala and Braeburn apples. Jazz apples have more of a tangy flavor and carry a lot of moisture in their flesh. Because they hold their shape and texture once they've been cooked, Jazz apples are the perfect apple for galettes and stuffed apples. Next we have Kanzi apples. Now the Kanzi apples are very similar to Jazz apples because they are also a cross of a Braeburn and a Royal Gala. The difference between these apples and Jazz apples is actually their area of origin. The Kanzi apple originates from Europe, specifically Belgium, but the name Kanzi is Swahili for treasure, which is actually the perfect name for this apple's balanced sweet and tart flavor, which make it a true gem for eating raw. Next we have the Braeburn, which is what we've been talking about for the last two apples. But did you know that the Braeburn is actually a cross between other apples itself? Braeburn apples are actually a cross between Granny Smith apples and Lady Hamilton apples. They have a streaky, almost orangish hue to them, and these apples have a little bit more zing to them, so their sweetness is accompanied with a sort of puckered spiciness. But because of that zing, they're perfect apples for anything. They can be cooked or eaten raw. Next, we're gonna take a look at Pink Lady apples. Pink Lady apples are crosses between Golden Delicious apples and Lady Williams apples. There certainly are a lot of ladies in the apple world. Pink Lady apples are actually the most common apples to be sold in pre-packaged slices. They actually sort of have a fizzy tartness to them, but finishes off really sweet, which makes them my favorite kind of apples. Next we have some of the cooler looking apples, the Jonagold. Jonagold apples were developed in the 1950s in upstate New York, but they actually are a cross between Golden Delicious apples and Jonathan apples that originated in the early 1800s. They are both sweet and tart and have a very strong honey aroma. Can I help you? Is mommy making apples? Just doesn't care that I'm trying to film. Get out of here. These Jonagold apples. Alright, bye. Thanks for visiting. Jonagold apples are actually hailed as the best apple for making apple cider and apple juice. Finally, we've made our way to the Golden Delicious. Surprisingly, Golden Delicious apples are not related to Red Delicious. They are often softer in texture, but still sweet they're a little bit more mellow. Because of their higher acid contents and stable flesh, Golden Delicious apples are actually best used in tarts, crumbles, and breads. Next, we get to meet our Granny Smith apples. Granny Smith apples are actually named after a real Granny Smith. The Granny Smith apples originated from Australia in the early 1800s, and they were propagated first by Marissa Ann Smith, also known as Granny Smith. These apples are super tart and super sour, and they're actually my boyfriend's favorite for some reason. Despite their sour taste, green apples like the Granny Smith are often better for cooking applications. They have a super high acid content, and that means that they can hold their shape a little bit better when they've cooked. Plus, the sourness of the apple transforms into a rich, savory flavor and soft, tender flesh. A really cool fact about green apples is that once they've been cut, they won't go brown because of that high acid content in their skin. So that also makes them perfect for serving raw. Now on to another one of my favorites. Honeycrisp apples originated in Minnesota, and Honeycrisp apples are considered the 5th most popular apple in the United States. They are one of the more expensive varieties of apples because the University of Minnesota actually owns the patent on Honeycrisp apples. Which that basically means if you want to grow and sell your own Honeycrisps, you need to give the University of Minnesota a cut. I really should have gotten into the apple patenting business. Honeycrisp apples are one of my favorites because they are super sweet. And because of their crisp texture, they are perfect to eat raw. Next, we have the Macintosh. A Macintosh is a personal computer created by Apple. Wait, these Macintosh apples were actually developed by John Macintosh in the early 1800s. The original Macintosh tree that John Macintosh planted himself grew for 90 years until it died in 1910. Macintosh apples have a much softer flesh than their other apple varieties, which means that they have a sweeter flavor but a more mealy texture. While Macintosh apples are touted as all-purpose apples, they actually take less time to cook than the other apple varieties. However, Macintosh apples are quite volatile. They are really sensitive to temperature. If there's too hot or too cold, they can get mushy, and they brown really easily as soon as they've been cut. Despite all that, they are still the 3rd most popular apple in the United States. Next up, we have Gala apples. Now, Gala apples are considered the 2nd most popular apple type in the entire United States. Gala apples have the most mild taste and texture out of all the apple varieties that I was able to buy today. Gala apples are great for eating raw, but their best application is in savory sauces. And finally, the apple of America's eye, the Red Delicious. This is actually the most popular apple in the United States, and it's the worst one. Seriously, the only reason that the red apple is super popular is because it transports well, does great in cold storage, and lasts a really long time on the shelf, which means it's a grocer's apple's dream. At this point, it seems that the red apple is popular more because of tradition rather than taste and texture. And consumers are definitely leaning more towards Honeycrisps and Sweet Pink Ladies than they are with the mellow Red Delicious. They almost have a sort of mealy taste and a cardboard texture. But despite that, they are still pretty sweet. Out of all the apples I've covered today, let me know which is your favorite down in the comments below. And if there's an apple type that I didn't cover today, let me know what it is and where you got it. Now, as promised, we are going to turn all of these apples into apple cider. It's going to be the ultimate apple cider because it literally is going to have 12 different kinds of apples in it. Now, I just happen to have one of these Pampered Chef apple cores handy, and I'll leave a link in the description where you can find something similar, but this is going to really make cutting these apples a breeze. It looks kind of scary, but basically you can clamp this onto your countertops or whatever steady surface you have, and you can impale the apples on it so that you can skin and cut the apples in one easy motion. Get my handle. I'm gonna move my apples, and then I'm gonna clamp this onto my countertop right here. Will it clamp? That is the real question today. So now that we have this clamped on here, basically you just release the spring and pull it back. And then you select whichever apple you want to core and peel. And peeling is actually optional because of this little trigger mechanism here. But we are going to peel at least a couple of our apples before we make them into cider. The skin does add a little bit of texture and flavor to the cider, which is why I'm only going to leave it on a few apples because I don't want the bitterness to come through. Alright, so we've re-enabled our skinning piece here, and you basically just turn and the skin will come right off. Now this is going to be really messy because of how juicy all of these apples are. So I'm probably going to time lapse through actually coring the apples. But once they're all cored, you can just slide them off, pop the core out and discard that, and then you're left with a literal slinky of apple. And because we have a massive amount of apples, I have a massive pot that I'm gonna put them all in. Basically, you're gonna need a pot that's big enough for you to be able to not only hold all the apples, but to be able to cover the apples entirely with water. Uh-oh. Every once in a while, you'll accidentally decore your apple a little bit. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this one. Looks like this one is going to have to go in basically whole. So if you have something like this happen, basically you can unhook your thing. There you go. Pull the apple out, and then go ahead and just quarter any bits like this so that they can go into the pot and there's more surface area if you cut them. That's why I'm spiralizing mine for the surface area. But if something like that does happen, just take a knife and chop her up. Ooh. Now, if you don't have an apple corer, you can just hand chop your apples. But like I said, what you're going for here is as much surface area as possible so that when you boil the apples, they'll release as much of their flavor as contained within the flesh. It's actually really interesting seeing and tasting these apples side by side, because when you think of an apple, you're like, okay, it's an apple. Some are more sweet, some are more sour, but for the most part, they all taste the same. But that's really not true. There's definitely a wide range of flavors, from the more mellow to the extremely sour, and then there's even some flowery notes in the middle that you don't really get in other kinds of apples. So I actually really love doing projects like this where I can just experiment and play with my food, because after all, that's my favorite thing to do. And eat it! I love being able to go, oh, well, not like that. That was a bad example. I love it when it's just, it perfectly makes like a slinky. Oh! Oh. Green apple is literally so sour to me. This is worse than eating like straight up citric acid. This is beyond sour. Okay, last one. Whew. And that was actually like a decent upper arm workout there. Whew. All right, so we have our apples all nice and cored here, and then we're just going to toss them all into the pot. So our pot is nice and filled up here with apples. But there is one more secret that I have to share with you. There's actually a secret ingredient to apple cider that isn't apples. It's oranges. Apples and oranges really make for the best apple cider. Basically what the oranges do is they help bring out some more sweetness to the apple cider. And I'm actually just going to cut them all into quarters and toss them in with the apples pretty much whole. We'll be straining the apple mixture at the end, so it's okay if there's seeds or other sort of skin or debris that is contained in the apple cider, because like I said, we'll be straining at the end, so there's not a whole lot to worry about with particulate. So we have our apples and oranges all together, and there's one more thing to add for the best apple cider around. Spiced apple cider is definitely the way to go, especially as we progress further into fall. So what I like to do when I make my apple cider is take a coffee filter, put in a single cinnamon stick, just a tiny dash of allspice. Oh, the tiny bit is now on me. Just enough to really get that sort of scent. And there, honestly, what spilled out of my cap when I opened it was probably a bit too much. We're talking like 1/8 of a teaspoon here. And then just a tiny bit of ground cloves. Now, the reason we're using a coffee filter for our allspice and cloves is because we're using ground allspice and ground cloves. And while we are going to be filtering our apple cider at the end, these particulates are probably a bit too small and they will get through. So the best bet for optimum flavor without the floaties in the drink is to put it in a coffee filter and then seal it up as best you can. And I am just going to like fold it up, and then I'm gonna clip it right here onto the edge. Now, once you have all of your apples and oranges ready to go, you basically just need to fill the pot with water and then bring it to a rolling bubble. Once it reaches a rolling bubble, we'll go ahead and cover it and then let it simmer for another 2 to 3 hours. Honestly, it's best long, low, and slow for apple cider. I'm gonna go ahead and get that started, and then I'll check back in with you guys once I've finished my apple cider. At this point, the apple should be mostly cooked down to a pulp and should be swimming in a caramel-colored liquid. The next step is to strain the apples out of the liquid. I'm sure there are better ways to do this, but I have a fine mesh sieve and then a large mixing cup that I am going to use to strain my apples and collect that sweet cider. So we've got our hot cider here. So what we have to do is discard the seasoning. So you can see I left my cinnamon stick in this pouch here. So basically all I'm going to do is take it by the ladle and strain it through my sieve. So once you got it to this point where you have a lot of the solids left that are just sort of dripping into your container, basically what you can do is take the back of your ladle and push the liquid through the sieve even further. Here, just going to take that and discard it. Alright, so we have almost 8 cups of apple cider here, and another halfway to go. But the easiest way I found to store your apple cider is to transfer it into mason jars and then chill it until you're ready to serve. Now you can enjoy it warm, like a warm apple cider or a mulled apple cider are great ways to enjoy this. So I'm gonna go ahead and take care of that behind the scenes. And one final tip, if your apple cider is a little too sour or too bitter, you can always add sugar after the fact to adjust it to your specific tastes. Now it's time for the ultimate apple cider taste test. 12 different apples went into this apple cider. Is it going to be the best apple cider ever? Let's find out. Yeah, it's definitely made with 12 different apples. It is very sweet. It is very sour at the end, and the oranges actually help to mellow it all out so you get this refined cider flavor. It definitely has a very natural sweetness, which I really enjoy. Thanks for hanging out with me today to get to know your apples. If this recipe made you hungry, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below on what your favorite type of apple is. Don't forget you can find this recipe and many others on thestarvingchefblog.com. Follow The Starving Chef on Facebook to keep up with my #recipe of the day. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers!